She may ought to stick to something she knows, like bartending.
If we're sticking to what we're good at, Mike Huckabee should probably stick to making racist comments on Twitter. Those are easier for people who don't know what they're talking about and don't really have the intelligence to debate the substance. AOC is back under fire for absolutely ridiculous reasons, as she wrote out a thoughtful post about the conflict in the Middle East and specifically the situation Palestinians are facing. However, right-wingers are explicitly upset that she left out Israel in that post, which kind of reminds me of the whole "you can't say Black Lives Matter, it has to be all lives matter" talking point. That is really just a right-wing tactic, which in this case is used to invalidate Palestinians further and also liken them to Hamas or terrorists to desensitize you to what's happening to them, as you can't talk about the innocent babies and women getting incinerated in Gaza without also mentioning Hamas, because those Arabs, they're all terrorists. This is the true right-wing position. They're rather mask off about it, but before we get into it, I want to show AOC's post on the screen here first. Pause if you'd like to read the whole thing, but it's important to remember going into the clip, her likening Jesus to a Palestinian Jew and not mentioning Israel, but I wanted to show you here Mike Huckabee on Fox absolutely blowing a gasket over this.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that, Carly.
Yeah.
First of all, is she not aware that Jesus was Jewish? Is she not aware that the whole term Palestinian meant Jewish people until 1962, when Yasser Arafat co-opted the term and created a nation and made up a people and called them the Palestinians, who previously were Jordanian? Is she aware at all of the fact that when she talks about how Bethlehem is not letting the Christians celebrate Christmas, back in the 80s, and I was going there since 1973, but in the 80s, up until then, 80% of the population of Bethlehem was Christian, 20% was something else. Now it's 80% Muslim, and there's only about 15% Christian, because the Christians were pretty much burned out and shut down by the radical Muslims who took it over back during the Intifada. So this is a person who is utterly ignorant about what she's talking about, and she may ought to stick to something she knows, like bartending, because for gosh sake.
A few quick things to get into, but first, if we're sticking to what we're good at, Mike Huckabee should probably stick to making racist comments on Twitter or having to step down from his positions for being an absolute homophobe. The ad hominems are kind of easy when you're an absolute piece of shit. It must be a slow news day for Fox to cover an Instagram story, but I guess that explains their dying ratings. But on to the substance of what he was trying to say. Jewish Palestinians are a thing. AOC knew it was a thing. It's always been a thing, and she knows this because she mentioned it in the post as I showed you. Convenient to them to leave that part out, though, to try to spin a narrative here. Even when the population of Bethlehem was mostly Christian, it was still Arab Christians. The picture he's trying to paint by saying they're Christians is, oh, they're like white Christians, you know, not Arabs. And they definitely were not a majority Jewish anyway. So what part of that gives any right of it to Israel? It doesn't make much sense. And bringing up the Intifada only shows how truly sick this man is, and probably willfully ignorant to act as if the Muslims were the aggressors in any way, forcing themselves into cities to take them over. The Intifada happened due to the brutal occupation at the hands of the Israelis, subjecting 90% of the Palestinian population to abject poverty. An Israeli driver struck and killed 4 Palestinian civilians, which is what started the whole ordeal, in which Palestinians were protesting in the street, graffitiing buildings and doing things so on and so forth, in which Israel's response was to deploy 80,000 troops. Within 13 months, over 300 Palestinians were dead, only 12 Israelis. There's pictures I can't even show of Israeli soldiers beating Palestinian babies with clubs. Now imagine if there were riots going on in America and America deployed 80,000 American troops to this city, mowed down 300 of them within months, and then said, it's just what happens when you protest. They're beating kids with clubs. Would that be humane? No, it wouldn't. But when it happens in the Middle East, we're so desensitized to it, I guess. I'm not. But Republicans try to act like, it's just what they get. October 7th, you have to mention that. Like, no, it's still a grossly inhumane act. There's still grossly inhumane acts on both sides, and you're allowed to talk about both. In the whole 6 years of the Intifada, over 1,000 Palestinians were killed, around 250 of those being children, and it was due to this, the conditions of the brutal occupation going on by the Israelis, and a lower birth rate for Christians than Muslims that led to the consistent and steep decline of the Christian population, while the Muslim population had been consistently rising to where we see today the majority being dominant predominantly Arab Muslims. And regardless of all that, everything AOC said actually holds true. He didn't even try to debunk any of it or prove it as not because he knows that. He instead just was like, let me go for the ad hominems because those are easier for people who don't know what they're talking about and don't really have the intelligence to debate the substance of the topics. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew forced to flee from far-right subjects and forces, which is paralleled by Netanyahu's bloodthirsty attempts to conquer Palestine and ethnically cleanse its civilians. If you enjoyed this video, we're Social Society. We're a commentary channel influenced by politics, society, and the economy. We are pretty left-leaning on this channel, but we're open to our right-wingers as well. The biggest thing here is having conversations that get everyone to the bottom of the truth. If that sounds like something that could interest you, consider smashing that subscribe button, leaving us a like, or even commenting on this video, because the only way we become a society is together.